ancient city of Nineveh in northern Iraq, archaeologists sifted through dusty remains, hoping to find records to prove that Bible stories were true. What they found instead was one of the oldest libraries in the world. Inscribed on crumbling clay tablets was a 4,000-year-old story, so riveting, the first person to translate it started stripping from excitement. Called the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story starts with Gilgamesh, king of the city of Uruk, crashing every wedding and sleeping with the bride before she has a chance to sleep with her husband. To tame Gilgamesh, the goddess Aruru created a rival called Enkidu. Enkidu lived beyond the walls of the city, where chaos reigned and wild animals, invaders, and evil spirits prowled.
Got it.
You ready for this?
Please.
So we've talked a lot about giants and the fallen angels, the watchers, and how there's been so much within history of the Greeks and the Sumerians and all these cultures having these demigods, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people have speculated that these demigods were in fact real, but they were actually the Nephilim race or the watchers themselves. Have you ever heard of the story, the Epic of Gilgamesh?
Yeah, it's familiar.
Very familiar name, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know a lot about it. I've heard the name before. I started looking into that. So Gilgamesh is, the story was written in the 2000 BC, and it was discovered not very long ago. Like, I think it was the late 1800s, early 1900s. But that's where they found like the Sumerians, the like the Sanskrit and stuff, and they're saying like this is the oldest civilization. But Gilgamesh, the story was about this king named Gilgamesh.
Scientists have recently discovered an ancient tomb in Iraq, with speculations that it might be the long-sought final resting place of the legendary King Gilgamesh. This monumental discovery has sent shockwaves across the globe. Inside the tomb lie secrets that have been buried for hundreds of years, poised to potentially reshape our understanding of early civilizations and rewrite history.
But this Gilgamesh guy, the story talks about how he was 2/3 God and 1/3 man. And the claim was that he was 17 feet tall.
Oh, man.
For centuries, historians had been divided over whether Gilgamesh actually existed, since in the epic, he is described as a 17-foot-tall giant, a crossbreed between a normal human and a Mesopotamian goddess.
Yeah.
And he was this brutal king, like just mean, like a tyrant.
Yeah.
And the god Anuk sent this other man, that they created this other man that matched Gilgamesh in every way, and his name was Enkidu. And the description of Enkidu is he was a wild man created by the god Anu, which is like the Anunnaki,
Okay.
fallen angels.
Yeah.
Who is described as strong, fast, and intelligent, but more animal than human.
Oh, no.
He has shaggy hair, clothes himself with animal skins, and lives like a wild creature with no contact with other humans. And so he was basically sent to correct Gilgamesh and like fight him, but then they end up becoming buddies. This is the whole Epic of Gilgamesh.
Like
they become.
Why are we fighting?
Yeah, they
We
become
love
friends.
each other. Look at you. You look like me.
And they go on these conquests to get back at the Watchers,
Wow.
or the Anunnaki. And Enkidu ends up dying, and then Gilgamesh, apparently the story goes that he went down into the underworld to save him, but ends up dying himself.
Oh, that's real, bro.
Yeah,
Bro
well, they're
friendship.
probably Nephilim.
Oh.
But a lot of people have speculated that the Epic of Gilgamesh is actually an epic written about King Nimrod.
No way.
Interesting.
Which people theorize that Nimrod himself was a descendant from the fallen angels, like a Nephilim himself. And so a lot of parallels with Nimrod and Gilgamesh, same region, same story of this like mighty hunter, mighty man. But they describe in the Epic of Gilgamesh his burial site. And it's this very elaborate burial site. And it like even hints at something of like he was buried in what's called a resurrection tomb, meaning that potentially one day he could come back.
Yeah.
And the story goes that he was buried under the Euphrates River.
That's drying up.
Well, here's the thing. In 2003, a archaeologist by the name of Jörg
Fassbinder and his team of archaeologists, using modern technology to look deep into the ground, discovered an entire ancient city beneath the desert. Astonishingly laid out just as the city of Uruk, over which Gilgamesh had purportedly reigned, was described in the epic. There were houses and gardens and fields alongside an incredibly sophisticated system of canals, leading archaeologists to describe the site as Venice in the desert. More importantly, on the outskirts of the ancient city was what appeared to be a burial site, which archaeologists believed to be the tomb of the ancient king.
The Bavarian Department of Historical Monuments in Munich told the BBC's World Services Science and Action program, quote, "I don't want to say definitively that it was the grave of King Gilgamesh, but it looks very similar to that described in the epic. We found just outside the city, an area in the middle of the former Euphrates River, the remains of such a building which could be interpreted as a burial," Mr. Fassbinder said. In the book, Gilgamesh is described as having been buried under the Euphrates. He said the amazing discovery of the ancient city under the Iraqi desert had been made possible by modern technology. The most surprising thing was that we found structures already described by Gilgamesh, Mr. Fassbinder stated. We covered more than 100 hectares. We found garden structures and field structures as described in the epic, and we found Babylonian houses.
He was in the Mesopotamia area and doing like the whole LiDAR thing. And what he said is, "I have found the tomb of Gilgamesh."
Oh my gosh.
And he says there's an article about it in the BBC in 2003. So he found it in April of 2003.
Yeah.
He goes and he's like, everything that the script talks about matches identically to what I found. And so, but it's underground, right? So they have to like dig it up. And so they start the process of digging it up. Guess what happened 1 month later?
Shut down.
Earthquake.
But then, the unthinkable happened. Mere weeks after the tomb of Gilgamesh was discovered, the United States invaded Iraq, forcing Fassbinder and his team to abandon their work and flee the country.
Houses. Here, predictably, is where the story goes silent. Due to conflict within the country, it was largely believed the excavations had been halted. However, it seems that the discovery of King Gilgamesh may not have been made in isolation. This footage was supposedly leaked to numerous places across the internet and has largely been put down as authentic footage of the find. Shortly after this was taken, reports state that American forces moved in and seized the find. Why do the powers that be see fit to suppress such discoveries? The very real tombs of characters long thought to have been mythical, Osiris being but one example among many which have undoubtedly been hidden from the public.
The U.S. invades Iraq,
Oh my gosh!
which it was in Iraq.
No way.
Yes.
Oh, man.
This is where it gets crazy.
Yeah.
So, the U.S. invaded Iraq 1 month later after the discovery, and all the archaeological sites were then stopped in Iraq, so stop digging.
Yeah.
And the U.S. military set up an encampment around the tomb site. They kicked out all the scientists. They wouldn't allow any media who were there to cover the story anymore. So that was like ABC News, BBC, because they were stationed there to like find the more discovery of like them digging it up. They said, "You're out of here." And Jorg said, basically like, "We are not allowed to dig any further because of the war. We're afraid of looters, and just some things will have to remain buried."
And it's never gotten picked up again.
Just prior to the Iraq invasion, which toppled Hussein, astonishing discoveries were being made in Iraq, culminating in one of the most extraordinary claims anywhere for centuries, a claim which American forces have been strongly accused of confiscating, subsequently becoming the prime suspect as the driving force behind a complete suppression of these astonishing discoveries within the country.
Well, here's the thing.
They
Or the
picked
United States.
it up.
But the locals around this encampment, the U.S. encampment, reported that the U.S. military were digging at night, taking things out of the ground and putting them onto trucks and driving them off.
We're villains.
Before the looters came, the U.S. military came, rushed in, and stole vaults
Oh my gosh.
from the bowels of the museum, put them onto trucks, and then drove off. And so then the CIA, the FBI, and a couple other divisions were called in to investigate whether or not this claim was true. And they saw like the looters did in fact loot the museum, but they went down to the bowels, which is a really hard place to get to apparently in the museum. And what they noticed were like thousands of boxes were empty. There were vaults missing, but what was left were like gold coins, silver coins, and artifacts that were actually incredibly valuable. So they're like, looters did not come down here and steal this stuff because they left all the valuable stuff. So what did they take?
What's missing?
They don't have an inventory of what's in their museum.
I don't know. That there's no other article after 2003 about the Tomb of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
It's left. Don't touch it. Don't talk about it.
Yeah, because they can't look at it, they can't touch it, they can't talk.
Maybe some clues to why his tomb has been hidden lay within the epic and the immense powers Gilgamesh was said to have possessed. He was the fifth king of Uruk, and his power was so mighty, many believe that the stories surrounding him are just myths that were built around his seemingly superhuman strength and endurance. However, serious scholars concluded that the story of Gilgamesh was nothing more than a fairy tale due to the astonishing story. In the epic, the great king is thought to be too proud and arrogant by the gods, and so they decide to teach him a lesson. Enkidu and Gilgamesh, after a fierce battle in which neither are bested, become friends and embark on adventures together. When Enkidu is struck with death, Gilgamesh falls into a deep grief and, recognizing his own mortality through the death of his friend, questions the meaning of life and the value of human accomplishment in the face of ultimate extinction. Casting away all his old vanity and pride, Gilgamesh sets out on a quest to find the meaning of life and, finally, some way of defeating death. In doing so, he becomes the first epic hero in world literature. The grief of Gilgamesh and the questions his friend's death evoke resonate with every human being who has wrestled with the meaning of life in the face of death. Is this leaked footage of the Tomb of Gilgamesh? Regardless of its authenticity, why all the secrecy? Are we, as a species, not capable of being presented with things which test our core beliefs without erupting into chaos? It seems for now, we may have to wait to find out.
You're here because you know something. You're here because you know something.